because the way that we work is inherently based on the way that these applications run, right? The way that we deliver technology, the way that we deliver products to our consumers is derived off of the basis of actually making sure that those things can happen and making sure that our teams and the individuals who contribute to that value actually have access, right? And the consumers who are actually trying to make the acquisition of our pieces of products, they need access. And I think one of the things that's actually happened as a result of the pandemic is that we have also put a really fine point on what happens when things don't work. Because if there are performance issues, if there are issues with the applications that you're using to run, to deliver product to the market, we lose money. We see increases in cost. We see increases with challenges in acquisition satisfaction. We see employee satisfaction challenges. And I think the other part that, frankly, I don't think we have the answer for yet, but I'm really interested in hearing the group's perspective, is what's happened as a result of the Great Resignation, right? The movement of the workforce. I'm an example of that, right? I was in Boston, right? I was working in Cambridge, and the pandemic hit, and my husband and I looked at each other with 4 young kids alone, and we said, what are we doing? And we came home to Chicago. And we've seen that happen in an unprecedented way. And because of the nature of how organizations are changing the way that they work and making it more accessible, right? You can work anywhere these days, right? I mean, there are exceptions, but in the general sense, we've created fluidity, which has increased the level of competition for getting high caliber talent to come in and stay in a way that is, again, I don't think we have the answer for this, because people have gotten to the point, we were in the room prepping today, and I talked about the fact that I think one of the greatest things that I've seen is that people are kind of done working for jerks. They don't have to anymore, right? They don't have to work the way that they once did. They don't have to be mandated to, they know they don't. And so when we think about how technology plays a role in that, and the role that automation can play, the hypothesis that I'd like to present today is I actually think it can become one of your greatest differentiators, not only for how you attract talent, but how you retain it, and then how you continue to lead them through the skilling process as frankly, our world, right, our economies continue to evolve, because the fact that automation is coming in, right, and is playing a greater role in how we deliver does not mean that jobs are going away, right? It means that we can finally tap into the extraordinary creativity that's created by humans. And that's, I think, a lot of what we're going to cover today. But I wanted to say thank you. Thank you for spending the time. Thank you for, in advance, all of what I know will be some great questions and great points. And with that, I will hand it back to Janet.
Mandy, even though you were herding and wrangling 4 kids during the pandemic, you managed to look pretty fantastic. I think the rest of us would, what do they say in England, look like you've been pulled through a hedge sideways when you had to deal with all of that. Okay, so we are really efficient with your time, which is why I love these summits. It's not day long where we make your eyes glaze over. We tackle the important things and we do it efficiently. So right now we are going to dive in. As you know, companies across all sectors are leveraging the latest advancements in automation and AI to create seamless workflows between job functions and different lines of businesses. It's a challenge, but if you can achieve this, it makes things so much better. And we are lucky to be joined today by 4 executives, 4 leaders, and they are going to share with us how they are leveraging these technologies to transform operations, break down silos, and optimize the efficiency of their various companies. So let me start welcoming them up. I'll turn the stage over to my colleague, Anurag Rana from Bloomberg Intelligence. And joining on stage right now, and I will step off on this side, is Mabi Amuye, Senior Director of Analytics and Chief Data Scientist at Norfolk Southern. Elizabeth Hegeman, Executive Director of Global Manufacturing and Engineering at Cummins, Inc. And Jason Keeler, Executive Vice President and Chief Operating Officer at the University of Chicago Medicine.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Nice to see all of you. It's a very nice day outside, and I've lived in Chicago for almost 2 years now, and I mean, this is, I think, the best part of being in this area is the current temperature. But happy to have everybody. My name is Anurag Rana. I'm a technology analyst with Bloomberg Intelligence, which is Bloomberg's in-house research arm. I follow most of the large cap technology companies, AWS, Apple, Microsoft, and IBM, and a bunch of others. And today I'm very happy to discuss this topic because I've heard about this for many, many years, and yet I still don't figure out how it's implemented in the real world, which is why we have a very distinguished panel. Perhaps we can start off with a quick introduction from our panelists.
Hi, everyone. Jason Keeler. I'm the Chief Operating Officer at University of Chicago Medicine. Pleasure to be here.
Elizabeth Hegeman. I lead manufacturing engineering for Cummins.
Mabi Amui. I am a Chief Data Scientist for Norfolk Southern Railroad.
So the first and I guess the most basic question is, and everybody hears about AI all the time, how are you using AI to transform business processes in your respective firms? Anybody? Yep.
Sure, I could jump in. So we're really early in our transformation journey using digital tools. We've 3 years ago started looking at opportunities to automate some of our care processes and thought that, at the time, there could be some opportunity for cost savings. But as you fast forward 3 years, we've actually found that we actually need to do this to be able to supplement our workforce shortages. So, one example that, like I said, we kicked off a couple of years ago is called telesitting, where we use digital cameras in our rooms to be able to watch patients that traditionally required one-on-one personnel to sit with the patient for 24/7. We've now replaced that with the ability for one person to watch somewhere between 4 and 6 patients remote through visualization. And so they're watching the team and they're able to notify the local care team if the patient is about to fall out of their bed or they're about to elope or cause harm, right? So by doing that, we were able to save about 12 FTEs so far through the start of the project. But I think the future, when you talk about AI and how we're going to leverage that, is actually building algorithms to help detect movement of the patient, to help the person watching those multiple screens alert even quicker before a patient does harm. So I think we're still evolving, and to your point, I'm not sure we exactly know how we can leverage that, but the use of cameras in the room, I think, can really transform a lot of our processes moving forward.
It's interesting that you would say that. We have something very similar within our testing processes for our engines, where we watch our engines as they run in a test cell. And obviously there are thousands of parameters that we need to be adjusting every day, and they change based on atmospheric conditions, right? So obviously a person can't actually watch thousands of those. So when you think about the artificial intelligence required to do that, we'll use a digital twin. We were talking that's the buzzword these days, right? To actually twin the performance of that manufacturing cell, feed manufacturing execution system data into that twin, and allow the artificial intelligence to learn what's good and what's not good, and then deliver a better product to our customer.
So one of the exciting areas in our space that we are applying AI and we are basically fundamentally transforming it is the train inspection process. So every train that comes to or departs a major sorting facility, or we call it a yard, it needs to be inspected. And the fun fact is that for centuries, the train inspection process has been done one way. That is, 2 people on both sides of train walking along a 2 to 3 mile long train, looking at every single individual rail car and visually assess them for 300 plus different defects. It's a very time-consuming process. It takes 2 to 3 hours to complete. It's very cumbersome. And then you couple that with some of the environmental conditions that can go on in the field, such as adverse weather condition, heavy fog, heavy snow, and low visibility. Sometimes some of these defects can go undetected and cause service disruptions. Now, the way we are using AI is quite interesting in this space. We have cameras right by our trackside. As the trains are passing by at up to 60 miles per hour, they are imaging every single rail car from different angles. And we created tens of AI algorithms that are looking at these images independently and very accurately assess them for similar types of defects. And the results have been phenomenal. We are finding defects, and we are fixing them and preventing major disruption. So not only we are digitizing this process, and not only we are augmenting our capabilities, we're more productive, we're more safe, and we're also taking our service product to another level by preventing major disruptions.
I have a follow-up to all three of you on this one. And I hear this quite a bit, that because of automation, you can save X amount of FTEs and other that. There are a lot of people who believe that automation or AI will eliminate a lot of jobs out there. There's a lot of fear around it. I'm not in one of those camps. I think there's just too much shortage of labor supply out there. What's your take on it? Are people in your departments, the people who work for you, are worried about that their jobs can be replaced by somebody, and they really don't want to help you to automate some processes?
I think I'll take that one first. Very interesting question. Production automation is obviously one of the areas that we've been really focused on. And over the last 3 years, we've invested $37 to $40 million in automating with collaborative robots and industrial mobile robots. And you can talk to our people out on our shop floors, and they'll tell you, you can't have my cobot, right? Because what we focus on are the areas where they're doing very repetitive tasks that are not fun to do, or environmentally, it's just not a nice atmosphere to be in. And when you think about that, the number of people that we have in our manufacturing facilities around the world, 19,000 or so on the shop floor. And when we think about that, and we're predicting by 2030, there'll be a 30% gap in what we need, right, for people to work those operations, less than 10% we automate, right? Very, very low number of that will actually be automatable. It's still a great number, right? Probably somewhere around 1,500 opportunities for us in total, but it still doesn't reach nearly the gap that we have to fill.
Yeah, I think for us, as I said here, with over 500 vacancies on a workforce of 10,000, we continue to see that climb. After the pandemic, we've seen a lot of people exit healthcare as a career. People no longer sort of want to go in and put themselves and their families at risk. So the shortage that we already foresaw in healthcare is now exacerbated by the pandemic. And so I think for us, we have to automate. We no longer have a choice. Like I said, when we first started the journey, it was more about how can we see savings from FTEs. But for now, it's actually supplementing a workforce that really doesn't exist. And I think we're also focusing on those tasks that are not what people train to do. So if you're a nurse and you've gone to school for 4 years, you came to actually care for the patient, not move supplies from one supply room to another, or pharmaceuticals, or run lab specimens. So really looking at how we can use robots to do that and supplement and assist our workforce and not replace.
Yeah, in our space, some of it is that we're just changing the nature of the work. In the train inspection, for example, instead of finding the defects nowadays, now we're going to fix those defects. So it's kind of like tending the finders to fixers. So the nature of the work is changing and not necessarily eliminating.
So labor shortage is one key driver of change. What are some of the other things that are forcing you and your management team to say, we have to invest more in technology, we have to automate more? What are some of the other, I would say, key drivers of change in your respective areas?
I can go first.
Yeah, please.
So one of the areas in our space is just the complexity. What comes to my mind is the area of rail replacement and maintenance. One of the things that people might not know about railroads is that, for example, Norfolk Southern owns and maintains 28,000 miles of track, and our operation heavily relies on it. And our mission statement has always been to replace the right rail at the right time at the right location. And you can imagine with 28,000 miles of track, that's a lot of complexity. Now, we do that today. We inspect every foot of it, both with visual inspection and also some sensor-enabled instrumentations and rail cars that do it autonomously for us. But still, to get that holistic view of 28,000 miles of track, one of the things we are doing in this space is building the digital twin of the rail, where for every foot of it, we are contextually enriching it with all kinds of metadata and attributions and all the inspection data that we've gathered over the years, so that now you have this comprehensive view of the network, where for every foot of that 28,000 miles of network, you know what age it is, what manufacturer it was, what kind of inspection has been done to it, and then basically using an AI model to take it a step further and assess the health of it and help us maintain this large infrastructure. Again, for us, this key driver behind this digital twin is just simply the complexity of the network.
Very impressive.
I think for me, I'll hit on a different aspect of automation. When we think about digital twins, they can be utilized for manufacturing, for analysis-led design of manufacturing. We've been doing that for a long time with product development, right? Not so much in the area of manufacturing process development. And when you think about our industry in particular, with the demise of the internal combustion engine coming, right, we're changing drastically where we'll be focused in the future. So as we design these new manufacturing processes, it's very different. The turnover time is 3 years, right? We could design an engine manufacturing process and take 30 years to optimize it, right? And spend the time to do that. But the new products turn over every 3 years, and I don't have 30 years to do that continuous improvement. So I need to have it right the first time. Enter analysis-led design through digital twins.
Yeah, for us in healthcare, the big driver is around cost, right? So no surprise, you read about the healthcare costs in America, per capita being sort of the highest in the world. And so trying to think of opportunities to drive care out of the acute care hospital, which is the most expensive place to receive your care. And now with remote monitoring, the ability to monitor everything pretty much that we can monitor inside a hospital, to be able to monitor that at home. We're really starting to see this transition from the acute care side of things to home-based care. I mean, really exacerbated in the ambulatory space, where we now provide about 15% of our ambulatory care virtually, right? And the pandemic really forced the issue around that. So, there was a period of time here in Chicago where you couldn't come to the hospital for care unless you needed emergency care. So our ability to reach patients was through virtual. And so we stood up a virtual platform through our EMR, and it stuck. And I think it's been one of the sort of benefits to force our hand to say, you know what, virtual care actually works. And guess what? Patients prefer it, right? So you don't have to get in your car, you don't have to drive down to Hyde Park, you don't have to deal with parking and finding your way around our big complex buildings. You can sit wherever you are. We can have a productive conversation around your healthcare. We can track your blood pressure. We can check your pulse ox. We can, there's really no end to what we can do virtually now. And so the challenge we have in healthcare is how we continue to adapt that, how we continue to use sort of what the pandemic gave us to really force, there are hospitals, and we're on our way to providing acute care at home where you actually don't have to leave your house to receive the kind of care you would receive in a hospital. And the cost reductions that come with that, the convenience, the patient preferences that come with that, I think, we're just at the tip of the iceberg, but I think it's really going to be transformative for healthcare.
Yeah, the pandemic did change a lot of processes across the world, telehealth being one of them, and digital health is a very, very talked about area right now. In both your areas, which are more manufacturing and industrial focused, did you see massive changes in behavior of your workforce, I guess, during the pandemic, and now that people are returning more back to work? What all changes have you seen, either in the shape they work or they operate or they want to operate? What has been some of the major changes for you?
I think for my team specifically, if I think about manufacturing engineering now, one of the things during the pandemic that was very interesting that drove us to this digital analysis-led design and digital twins is that we had a need to redesign our manufacturing processes without being there, right? So I couldn't be in the plant to redesign those processes. We had to do that from home. So it drove us to have a need to have tools to allow our manufacturing engineers to work from home, at least on a part-time basis, right? And what we really found is that if we give people the time to focus, they're much more efficient. So bringing those digital tools and artificial intelligence tools in to aid them can really bring about a lot of change and a lot more efficiency for any one given person, which, given that we have an issue with being able to fill our open roles across the exempt workforce as well, not just an hourly workforce, that really brings about the need for those people to work more efficiently.
So one of the things within that, I would say the frame of discussion is, are you forced to upgrade your older systems to match up for that? Or is that something, or you're just moving to new kinds of products to take care of it? Because one of the problems that when I follow a lot of these companies is there's only a set amount of budgets that companies have. So the question is whether they maintain their older systems or they invest aggressively to update or buy newer, SaaS-based products or anything. How do you, balance those two things given budget constraints?
So for us specifically, it's really been, you have to find the things that you can invest in that will then allow you to pay for the next investment, right? So as we think about that, we actually started with production automation. And when you think about production automation, it's collaborative robots and it's industrial mobile robots. And we found there, as we were able to implement those things and we made commitments for the payback for those, that we earned the right to move on to things like digital analysis-led design, where we've seen great pull and now good payback for that. And then you move on to other systems that may not have the more obvious return, but as you've earned the right and been successful with other more obvious projects that have return, we can move on to those more detailed systems that then allow us to be much more efficient.
I do have a question for you, Jason, on the healthcare space. And this is something that I have been focusing on for, close to 20 years. And yet I am somewhat disappointed in the digital embracement of the entire, healthcare area. But we recently saw Microsoft buying Nuance and, Oracle buying Cerner. What is the mood inside the healthcare community about finally, getting to digitization that's even this par with, I think, the credit card world or the, financial world?
Yeah, so finally, I think is the word. In healthcare, we tend to be about 10 years at least behind other industries. I'm actually excited to sit here with these two and realize that our use of cameras and technology, we're not all that far behind. So I think we're starting to catch up. I do believe with the attention to healthcare, the resources, as you mentioned, going into healthcare, we will catch up. I think we're making great progress. And I was just thinking about how I'd answer the previous question. We are looking to partner with our current vendors to help develop the future. One area that is really interesting to us is what we call intelligent automation in diagnostics, right? So, in breast imaging, for example, how do you look at a whole series of images to find and detect things that the human eye may not be able to detect, or at least help call out and lead the radiologists that are looking at thousands of these a day to say, this one looks abnormal based on the last, 100. So that's already here. But what we're looking to do is how we can combine radiology as a diagnostic with pathology as a diagnostic. And so those are two different professions, pathologists, radiologists. How do you pull their images together digitally and say, when we have this finding on a radiograph and this finding in pathology, it means this, right? And then layer on genetics and say, when it's this plus genetics, so this is where your mind explodes, right? When you try to think about how a human can do this, but when you program a robot to do this based off of a whole slew of history, I think that's where transformation is going to happen in healthcare. I'm really excited about that.
Good point. Maybe just a question on the example that you gave on the cameras and the digital twin is pretty impressive. What are some of the other areas that you're focusing on that, I guess, deploy similar kind of technology and has a different, I would say, what would be some of your next generation projects that you would be working on?
Yeah, one of the ones that we are actively working on, and we've actually touched some pieces of it, is the locomotive predictive maintenance. One of the things that people don't know about locomotives, they look at it and they're like, okay, this is a traditional piece of machinery. But the fun fact is that our locomotives string 350 plus diagnostic sensors and elements about their engines and other parts of it in real time. So you can think it's actually a Tesla of the world in the railroad space. And you might wonder, well, what do you do with that 350 plus diagnostic sensors? So, locomotives, we do rely heavily on those to haul our trains. So a critical part of our operation rely on them. And railroads do not have the luxury of the highways where you have 2 lanes that if something breaks down, you can pass by. A lot of parts of our network is actually a single lane of traffic. So if something breaks down, basically you're going to block every train that's ahead of you or behind you. And because we are a network of trains, it's going to very soon start snowballing. And then you all of a sudden see that something that happened in Chicago can delay some trains in Atlanta. And one of the things we're doing is that we're utilizing those 350 plus diagnostic sensors, and we're creating machine learning models to predict certain locomotive breakdowns. One of the cases that we did back in 2018, and now it's in production, is to predict the loss of water coolant in a locomotive. So similar to the cars, the locomotives have radiators that cool down the engine oil. And if that radiator malfunctions, the oil can get really, really hot and start melting the engine components. Now, locomotives are smart. They shut themselves down before that happens. But in turn, you have a safe locomotive that's sitting in the middle of nowhere and delaying every other train. So it's very important for us to get ahead of that and be able to predict that event. So one of the things that we did, we created a machine learning model, a very robust model that is capable of predicting these events on average of 7 in advance of them happening. So you can imagine the locomotive is running, it's streaming 350 plus sensor diagnostic elements in real time, and then these models are running independently, they find the issue, and we went as far as automatically generating a work order against that locomotive to then take it to the shop and fix it so that we don't get hit by a surprise on line of road. And it's been, again, a tremendous efficiency for us because now we are preventing a major disruption event on average of 7 days in advance of time, and we're no longer delaying those trains for that corresponding reason.
I mean, it's really impressive. I wish I had all of this stuff I had no idea about before. We had 10 seconds left, so I just wanted to thank all of you. It's been a great session. One big theme that I took away was the labor shortage is extremely, I guess, here to stay, which may not be a bad thing given the meltdown in the market. I think labor market can support then, level of employment and at least spending, which should give us some comfort that the recession, even if it comes, may not be as bad as the previous ones. So thanks again for your time, and talk to you soon. So, thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Thank you. Up for the next session, I invite back my guest. Hi. Thank you.
Nice job.
All right.
Ooh, great.
It is bright. So we are continuing on, and we're actually, what we're going to spend this chunk of time talking about is, I think, an incredibly important topic when it comes to how we actually create, right, this workforce. How do we support the process and happening? And I'm really grateful, Brian, for you taking the time to talk with us. Really, I think the theme that you're going to hear during our time is the role of culture, right, and the importance of organizational readiness and kind of how you navigate that as you look to really manifest what's happening right now and get the best out of your employees and get the best for your organization. And so maybe we can start with a little bit about you. So, Brian's part of Deloitte. He had a big promotion towards the end of last year, so congratulations, as a senior manager of solutions architecture. Maybe you can start with telling us a little bit about your team and how they support Deloitte's mission as it relates to almost 350,000 employees, 150 countries. Certainly not a simple operation.
Right. So yeah, in solution architecture, our job is to solve problems, solve challenges, and try to identify those before they happen, right? Try to be proactive. And with 4,000 plus applications and 60,000 VMs and 350,000 employees, that's hard. And it's hard to keep up with that. And we have to find ways to be better, be proactive, and less reactive. I know the engineers I work with don't like fighting fires all the time, and would like to have more tools in place that keep things running and keep things performing at a cost model, right? So as we're migrating our data centers to the cloud, cost became this major, major issue. Is that a lot of sticker shock. And as our firms are starting, our member firms are starting to get those bills, it's a much different conversation to have versus CapEx versus OpEx. And so we started looking at tools to help automate some of this stuff and some of these decisions that we had to make at a global scale and much faster than humans can do. The staff we would need to do this with manpower, it's just not fathomable. You can't do it at the speed you needed to do it. So, our solution was to bring in, what was the solution there? Yep, Turbonomic. Is to bring in Turbonomic and to start to look at the ways that the AI engine within Turbonomic can help Deloitte and to help us start becoming more efficient with our cloud spend without ever risking performance. I don't know if you ever worked with a big firm before. We're very risk averse. We don't like anything to take anything down. And so we started looking at ways to do that, and Turbonomic definitely has a great engine that does that. That begins to the next question, though, is how? How do we do this?
Because it's not a straightforward thing, and I think, I listen to, University of Chicago Medicine, it's a near and dear to my heart. I spent about 15 years in healthcare technology, so the premise of do no harm, I think, has followed me in my career as it relates to the time that I'm now spending in automation. And when we think about and see a lot of the data around forecast, right? So it's predicted that almost 60% of organizations will have some level of, we say AI ops, but really AI ops is the application of AI to IT operations, right? There's a level of automation that is coming. It's inevitable. It's mandatory fun, right, at this point. But it's not as simple as flipping a switch, right? You can introduce the technology, but there is an entire process that needs to exist around that in terms of trust, in terms of culture. And so what are some of the big challenges you've seen as both in the case of Turbo as well as you looked at other technologies?
So the first thing you get is resistance. It's change. It's different. You're putting decision-making into a platform or a tool that you're used to controlling yourself, but you really can't control it at scale. It just doesn't work. And you find your operations teams are they're inundated with tickets, they're inundated with all these things that you're used to doing by themselves. And there's still that fear, right? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt, the FUD factor of what happens to my job if we implement this. If I start letting these tools make decisions for me, where does my job go? Well, as we've seen with the cloud journey, it doesn't really ever go away. It just kind of changes. And you have to just have a different way of thinking. And the biggest thing is just constantly having these conversations with different leaders within the firm and trickling it all the way down and getting people to buy into the concepts and learn to trust the concepts. So you have to start small. You're not going to just put this in and then say, okay, I want you to manage 60,000 VMs for me. You could, it's just not going to work.
And do you think that process for you, because this is something I spend a lot of time talking with teams about as we look at supporting them in transformation, where does it start, right? Because I think there's a lot of arguments out there that maybe it's at the dev level, maybe it gets picked up and it gets flywheeled from there. I think there's another principle, which is one that I see successful a lot more commonly, which is that it has to be a C-suite moonshoot, right? It has to be a choice that the organization is willing to make.
Yeah, you really need your C-level buy-in, and it needs to be solid. It needs to filter its way down as well. They need to stay engaged, is what I've seen. That works, and incentivize people. The biggest challenge I found with engineers or people that don't have a budget, they didn't care what the cost of the cloud was. They weren't incentivized to care. Keep the application running is all they've ever been told to do. And now they're being told to manage costs, don't ever break the app, don't do all these extra things that they're required to do now. But again, by themselves, you're not going to be able to do that, even with just one major application. So it has to be top down, it has to be communicated, it has to be consistent, and it has to keep, the message has to keep coming. You know, we talk business transformation all the time, but then living business transformation, as we know, is a totally different experience than just saying it.
Yeah. And one of the other things that I think came up in the previous panel that I also think is really kind of valid when we talk about this process internally is the concept of value, right? So you're going to make choices, you're going to implement or get behind certain special projects to drive transformation, but then how do you show your constituents that the choices are good, right? And so the idea of driving value becomes incredibly important. And so maybe you can talk a little bit as well about, because I think your team started very small, right, with Turbonomic. It was a kind of one thing, more, but there's actually been, I think, a pretty material return on investment associated with it that you've been able to use.
We can show, yeah, the tool definitely allows you to show what actions you've taken, what actions you've taken, what savings you've had. There's cumulative savings. There's also missed savings. What are we missing? And what those tools, these are graphs. These are for executives. Pretty pictures that show what we're doing, that show the value that we're adding. Where are we going with that? Value.
Yes.
Lost my
ROI.
train of thought. So ROI, you can really show the ROI quickly as long as you're taking the actions, and then as that is, it's kind of a crawl, walk, run methodology. Is you learn to trust the tool, then you start to automate the tool, and then you start to really add in the AI ops, which is integrating ServiceNow and all these other tools that kind of create a true workflow from start to finish, and it's an educational process for a lot of the engineers and the folks doing it.
And you touched on a small thing there, and I think it was nuanced, but it's still, I think, incredibly important for the group as you think about introducing IT automation. Is it's not necessarily about lights on, fully automated day one. I think one of the things that we've seen successful with different clients that we've worked with is that it's okay if initially the first step is that we're going to give you feedback about what we think should be done, and it's still the human, right, that's executing that. But maybe after 100 times, 500 times, 1,000 times, maybe we get to the point where we say, hey, we've been really consistent. If we can be explainable, can you turn it on? And so have you seen something similar like that with other automations you've put in place?
We're starting to turn that corner, especially with Turbo, is that, and we've been running it for probably, with this major application that we're using, for about 6 months, and they're starting to turn the corner of trusting it. It hasn't broken anything, which is good. We've saved a bunch of money, which is great. But ultimately, in a risk-averse environment, it's about performance and availability.
Yep.
And cost, as we know, with a migration to the cloud, cost isn't typically your number one reason you go to the cloud. It's up there. It's not far from the top. But really, your apps need to run, they need to perform, and they also need to be as cost-effective as you can make them. And that's what we're doing with Turbo, is we're really starting to get that automation piece, which really takes the engineer out of the picture, so to speak, and to make smaller decisions, and create a workflow that you almost don't notice Turbo's there anymore, is really the goal.
Yeah, and I think that's a really important point for the group as you think about this process of change. It's not instantaneous, right? It just isn't, right? And technology, like people, right, isn't perfect. And so this idea of establishing trust, and I think your note about the importance of sponsorship at the C-suite level, but follow through, right? Because it's one thing to stand up on stage at an all hands and say, we're doing this, right? It's an entirely different thing to see that through, right? And navigate the bumps and bruises that come along with large scale change. Now, I know, because we spent a lot of time talking about the fact that you're a fixture and you've done this in, large organizations. If you were to provide, sort of one of your best lessons learned for the group as we look to close around, how do you get from where we are today, which is this idea of where I think we still see a lot of resistance, right, to that change, to a place where people can begin to trust it? What would you say is the key?
Well, you start small. You start small and build trust with the tool, and get people to trust the actions that it takes, so you're not worried that you're breaking anything. Test it on resizing some VMs, test it on rescaling some volumes, and once people start to see it work, the light goes on. Yeah. But you are re-educating. There's definitely a re-education process, and as we've seen with the cloud over the last 10, 12 years, we've educated ourselves quite often
Indeed.
and over again.
Yes. Well, thank you, Brian, very, very much. And with that, I will hand it
having me.
back to Janet. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, guys.
We have 2 more sessions to go, and I'd like to encourage you to submit questions. For people in the room, you can submit the question using the QR code, and again, for people joining us virtually, you can use that white button on the screen. I'd now like to introduce our next guest, Catherine Clay, Executive Vice President and Global Head of Data and Access Solutions at CBOE, which many know as the Chicago Board of Exchange. Now, for many, like Bloomberg, CBOE deals with massive amounts of data. And I'd like for you to first share with our audience what we are talking about. Like, what does CBOE do, and what kind of data are we talking about here?
So for those that don't know CBOE, we are a global exchange operator. We operate markets in 25 different markets in many different countries. We span equities and options, futures, FX, and most recently, digital assets. So when you think about the scope of our business, you're really thinking about trillions of dollars of notional traded on our exchanges in the course of a year. In a single day, we trade over $80 billion of equities in notional. We trade over 10 million options contracts, 200,000 futures contracts, and it goes on and on. So clearly, when you talk about system hardness and data, we generate so much of that on a daily basis through our markets.
Data that has to be absolutely accurate and secure. I have to ask you, because of the time that we are in now with market turmoil, not only do you have to deal with the massive amounts of data, but you have to deal with changing demand that goes from day to day. So on a day like today, it's probably a little bit of a nightmare for you. How do you use automation to keep up with those massive swings in demand?
Yeah, well, Jen, it's a great point because, so many people count on our markets to be high integrity and up. I mean, we cannot be down. We have to be up 100% of the time. And so when we think about automation, it really goes back to how we actually build and deploy our code for our exchanges. And we have a very disciplined automated process to actually roll up our code on a weekly basis. And the checks that it goes through are just so hardened. We are highly regulated. And so the SEC, the CFTC, and other regulators across the world pay very close attention to how well we automate our code processes and make sure our markets are up when they're supposed to be up. We just cannot ever suffer any downtime. So we pay very close attention to all of that across all of our global exchange markets.
I want to ask you about the challenges of the pandemic. Every company, every industry in this room had to pivot hard. In your case, you had to go from a floor-based, in-person operation to going completely online, and to make sure that things didn't crash and fail. How did automation help with that?
Well, that was a huge day. I mean, like you said, everybody in this room, I'm sure, had a time when you had to look at your business when the pandemic first hit and try to figure out how you were going to take manual processes into an automated process. And so what Jan is talking about, for those that don't know, that we still operate a in-person trading floor where buy and sellers meet, price discovery is made, and transactions happen in an in-person pit environment. And when the pandemic first hit, we were faced with something we actually hadn't thought about before. Yes, we have disaster recovery plans. Yes, we have all sorts of failback methodologies. But when something like a pandemic hit and you're contemplating taking something that happened so precisely in person into an automated virtual world, it was quite a reach for the team to be able to remedy and replicate what we do on the trading floor into a virtual environment. And so that was a very stressful weekend of trying to figure out how we were going to replicate through electronic and digitization what was happening in the floor environment. But, a lot of room for error in that exercise, but really happy to say that we actually pulled that off using some of the latest tools that were available at the time.
And I want to bring up to the people in the room that are not dealing with finance, think about this. You could not fail, because if you had failed, the cascading problems that would happen, not just in the confidence of people using the platform, but everything related to it, would have been pretty catastrophic. There is no room for failure.
No, it would have been absolutely catastrophic. Imagine during that period of time when the market was falling, and this was a systemic shock to the market across the world. And what we knew is people, they have things that they need to hedge. They have portfolios that they need to protect, and that's downstream to the 401k plans and pension plans that we and our families and our parents rely on. So to fail in that instance would have been catastrophic. And so it can't be lost on anybody that the exchanges, the markets that provide that capital protection have to be available for all of those that need to access it in these times of systemic shock, when you most need to access that for hedging your risk in the marketplace.
Because things change so quickly and technology is advancing, even the most tech-savvy companies that I meet with in an interview, everyone always feels that they are catching up, or they have to keep planning in order to catch up as things change. And despite these things that you've described, which have been pretty remarkable, you say that CIBO is still in the early days of machine learning for your platform. So where are you focused now in your migration and adoption? And how are you hoping that automation, what are you hoping it will help you in the future?
So I think, to back up a little bit, for machine learning, we've been using machine learning techniques in our regulatory and surveillance functions at the exchange for quite a while. When you think about what machine learning really does do well, it fleshes out those patterns of nefarious behavior on our markets, where you're trying to look for spoofing or other types of trading activity that's not welcome in our marketplace. And so we have long been using machine learning and AI to flesh out those types of behaviors. But what we're really trying to do, especially as we migrate a lot of our data and analytics into the cloud environment, is to understand where the opportunities are to produce a better end result for our clients. And really, what we're always trying to do for the clients is get them to a more actionable step in their workflow. So they're trading, they're hedging, they're trying to manage their portfolio. What they want is as close to an end actionable result as we can give them. And so we're looking at machine learning to try to get to that actionable point much faster. And we can use things in the cloud native environment, like SageMaker, for example, in AWS, but all cloud environments have some native functionality that lends itself to helping us get accelerated on this path to machine learning. So it is early days for us, but it is ever-changing, and it's really interesting and fascinating work to be involved in.
Since you brought up the challenge and the need to migrate these massive amounts of data to the cloud, which is, again, something that seems to be common across all industries, I have to ask you about the security issues, because the cloud is in some ways as mystifying on a certain level as automation and AI are. So can you talk to us about how you make sure that everything is secure in that migration?
So again, we're learning a lot about the security issues within the cloud environment. But if you think about it, really the cloud environment is a third-party data provider with an internet connection. And so when you take those two things about losing complete access and control of your own data, now you've introduced the internet component to it, of course there's going to be security concerns. All I can say is we pay very close attention to dipping our toe in the water of the cloud before we actually do really see changes into the cloud, because of these very concerns. And because, as we've covered, Jen, we as an exchange are so highly regulated, there's no way we can misstep anytime we do any of these technological innovations. And so we're dipping our toe in the water in areas that we feel are safe. But we certainly aren't an exchange that are taking our matching engines up into the cloud environment yet, as some of our competitors and peers are actually contemplating doing. And we're waiting for our clients, frankly, to say that's where they want us to be. We have yet to have a lot of clients come to us and say, we really would like you to take your match up into the cloud. But we're listening, and should we hear that message from our clients, it's something we'll get more aggressive about.
About the idea that you have to have perfection, it's not just a risk of unhappy customers. You brought up earlier the intense regulation that you face. And for the companies and industries that are joining us that also operate across different jurisdictions and countries, talk to us about the challenge of the regulation that you not only face in the US, but also different standards and rules and laws and everything in a variety of different countries.
So I first want to just say that we view our regulators and the regulation standards that we have to meet as somewhat of a competitive differentiator. for us. And by that, I mean, all you have to do is look around at what's happening in crypto right now and what's transpiring with Luna and UST and now Celsius, and just know that there's a reason we really treat our regulators as our partners, because we do believe that the end client, the investor, needs to be protected in these marketplaces. And so when you think about regulation, yeah, we're highly regulated. It can feel onerous. It is hard. It's not an easy thing to have to operate a business under so much scrutiny and so much regulation. And as you said, Janet, we face this scrutiny, not just in the United States, but in our markets in Canada, in Europe, in Australia, in Japan. And increasingly, as we expand even further across the globe, we're going to have to just be welcoming of the regulatory requirements that come our way and know that we're very good at navigating these waters. And it is a competitive differentiator for us. And it should give the individual investor a lot of comfort that we pay close attention to what the regulations are and how we can best work with the regulators to make sure we offer a high integrity market across the globe.
So even as you both fear and love and appreciate the regulators, it does come down to the customer. That is the audience, the clients that you have to protect. And you're dealing with so much proprietary information. This day and age, we are constantly hearing about hacks and breaches and such. Securing this data could not be achieved by people sitting and just watching the data. Can you share with us about the power of automation to do the jobs that is just too massive, no matter if you could hire all those people?
Yeah, I mean, we actually use a lot of cutting edge technology, and I'm not a part of the cyber team at CIBA by any stretch, and so I'm no expert on the subject, but I've looked into the control room of our cyber team, and it is very high tech. They're doing so much to make sure that they're monitoring all of our systems for the hacks. And inevitably, I've asked some statistics about how many times do we actually get, some sort of attempted attack, and it is shocking the number of attempted attacks that try to hit our network. And so they are using so much automation, so much cutting edge technology to make sure our systems are robust and that we are not getting attacked in ways that we certainly do not want to be.
I was hosting one of these summits in San Francisco last week that was concurrent with the RSA Security Summit, and I asked everybody, so it's bad, is it going to get worse? And they say much worse. The attacks are going to get much worse. And as we have a shortage in jobs in cybersecurity, because you not only have to validate and fight the real attacks, you have to fend off and determine what is not a real attack. That takes a lot of man hours. And so again, automation is so key there. You talked about the rollout of code, and what I was really impressed with is that CIBO, is generating a lot of new code every week, and you have to deploy this so that the customer, the trader, the client actually has no idea. It's seamless to them. How do you manage this?
So this is where we strive with automation. So just for example, every Sunday, there's an automated process where a new branch of our entire code base is launched. And then as Monday comes in and the coders begin coding, the code is automatically rolled up into this process. And it's checked and it's validated. And all sorts of things are happening behind the scenes. The sausage is being made, and our clients are never subjected to all of the things that we're doing. And it's not that it's all automated. There are certainly manual checks along the way to make sure that everything is passing certification and is ready for our weekly release at the end of the week. But it is so automated, the code rolling up, the code getting checked, and the processes. We pride ourselves in being able to do so much in an automated function for the way that we build and deploy code among all of our global exchanges. It's quite amazing when you think about it.
Are you able to hire enough engineers?
No.
Data scientists? No. Analytics? So
no.
How do you manage?
I don't think we're alone in this. If we ask people in the audience to raise their hands about how many people can get every person they need on the team, I think we would see very few hands. It is high demand. It's a very specific skill set. And the more automated, the more technologically driven our entire society becomes, the more these types of talent are in demand. And we are growing tremendously, just like other companies, and always looking for more resources for those key and hard to find jobs. And I would throw quant into that definition. We can never find enough quantitative folks for the things that we build.
Another challenge that you face that I found surprising is that even though you are an financial information transaction company, you are not immune from the supply chain crisis. How has that impacted you?
Yeah, I mean, it has impacted us. I mean, just like anybody trying to order servers or things they might need for their, just hardware builds, we're not immune from the delays in sourcing that equipment. But we are fortunate in that we're not supply chain heavy, and so we're not getting substantial delays in many parts of the supply chain that would be relevant to our business. But I don't know that anybody's immune from what we're seeing in terms of supply chain disruption, and we definitely suffer from that as well.
We are down to our last few minutes, and again, we welcome you all to submit questions if you have them. But I always like to ask people as they sit in a role where they have to look at automation and how it's going to carry their business forward. What are the problems, the challenges that you see on the horizon that you absolutely need to increase automation in order to meet those challenges as your business continues to change and grow?
So one of the things that we really have to aspire to, not just because we're highly regulated, but because people need to understand how we get to the end result of our analytics or even an index that we create, transparency is the key. And sometimes when you start introducing a ton of automation, you lose the ability to communicate the transparency of how you got to that end analytic, that end value, that end result. And so one of the things that we really have to be cognizant of is if we're introducing automation, if we're bringing machine learning into our product portfolio, we still have to be able to explain how that worked and how we got to where we got to. We can't just say, oh, trust us, trust the machine learning, it worked, it got us to this point. People will say, I need to understand that process as well. And that's what makes it a little bit difficult, is that you really have to be able to communicate transparently how that automation got you where you got.
Do you have any advice that you can share with some of the industry leaders with us today on how you get your teams to adapt, especially when they have to adapt in such a quick and fast manner?
So, I mean, we've spent a lot of time, and I think it's a topic of this conference as well, is really thinking about the future of work and how we want the team to engage and what their career pathing looks like. And we've really landed on this concept that, we are all adults and we're going to trust our teammates to make the right decisions for how they want to work when they work best, and let them be the most productive that they can be. And we invite complete cooperation and collaboration and all of the things we build in our product portfolio. So I think it's just making sure that we give people maximum flexibility, but offer those opportunities for connection. That's key. And we know we lost a little bit of that in the pandemic. But we're bringing all of that back and giving people the opportunity to come back to the office on their own terms when they want to, and providing ways for all of us to connect again, because it is super important. And I think all of us would agree, because we're sitting in a room together, that it does matter to be in person. And it's certainly great to be here with you, Janet, in person today.
Well, thank you so much for sharing all of your insights and experiences. And if any of you want to approach Kathleen later and ask her how she does what she does, and one question I did not get to ask you, so I'm just going to plant this idea, is that you were overseeing and running things that didn't exist 20 years ago. 15 years ago, which means when you're taking this position, you don't necessarily have someone that you can look to teach you. You have to learn. So that's another big topic that I hope you will get to discuss with Catherine. I'm certainly going to be asking everyone how you upscale yourself. But thank you, Catherine, so much for joining us and sharing your insights and experiences. Okay, we are now down to our final panel, and we are going to look at how organizations are leveraging AI to enhance the customer experience. Because as Catherine shared with us, no matter what, it really does come back down to that. Any company that is able to excel in providing excellent customer service, accurate delivery of your products and your services, timely care, they gain the competitive edge, and that means they win the space. So our next panelists will discuss how AI is enabling an optimal experience for their customers. I would like to welcome you up right now. We are very lucky because among the panelists, we have an academic. And the academic, I expect I'm going to ask about the overview of how fast things are changing, and also do we have enough people coming up within the industry in AI to hire? So that is Gary Bertolini, Dr. Gary Bertolini, Senior Vice President of Online and Learning Innovation at Purdue University. Tom Bianculli, Chief Technology Officer at Zebra Technologies, and Sachin Devand, Chief Technology Officer at Groupon. Thank you so much for joining us. So I am going to start with Zebra Technologies. It is a tech company. Would have to be a tech company with a cool name like that. Yet it is 50 years old.
Yes.
So for the people that don't know, describe what Zebra does.
Sure, Janet. Yeah, so Zebra Technologies develops visibility and mobility solutions to help frontline workers get their job done. So if you think about that in the form of barcode reading equipment, Android-based mobile computers, on-demand printing, and then apply it to use cases like that nurse that's administering medication bedside to make sure the right patient is getting, identify that patient and make sure the right patient's getting the right medication delivered the right way at the right time, or translate all the way over to another vertical like retail to ensure that in aisle that a modern experience can be brought to that shopper in the aisle to cross-sell and upsell between that store associate and the shopper in the store, or a courier delivering to your front door. It's using those devices to capture that information in real time and help empower that frontline worker to be the best they can be.
Although the goal and the needs and the services you provide have probably been the same of what you started out with 50 years ago, not you personally, but the company. For a company that's 50 years old, you've had to change.
Yes.
And I know that part of what you've done with automation is that you've built some things internally, but you've also made some acquisitions in AI and industrial manufacturing in the past year. Can you tell us about those?
Yeah, I mean, it's really relevant to the topic today because the focus of the strategy around that Terran acquisitions, which was probably over the last 30 months, about 6 or 7 different acquisitions that were all focused in the intelligent automation space. And every one of them has been targeted at either augmenting or automating workflows. So as an example, we acquired Fetch Robotics in the second half of last year based in San Jose that makes autonomous mobile robots to collaboratively engage with workers in a warehouse for picking applications. We acquired Reflexis in late 2020, which is really focused on providing task and labor scheduling to be able to more dynamically allocate that labor pool in a way that can meet the dynamic demands that our customers are seeing. And is where we talk about often this shift of the production and provision of products and services ever closer to the point of demand. The idea that I can get what I want, when I want, and how I want it delivered is really creating I would say diminished predictability in our customers' environments, and they need to act and move in real time. And so a lot of our acquisitions have been either doing that physically or doing that digitally with digital decisioning type capabilities.
Sachin, Groupon, and you have joined Groupon very recently, is a much younger company. It started in 2008. We all know what Groupon does. So you were digital from the beginning, but yet the company is transforming, and you actually have an announcement timed with this summit. What are you announcing?
Well, I mean, there are a lot of new things happening at Groupon. We've had a new CEO, and I've joined recently. So we've been doing a lot of tech innovations, and essentially there are a lot of things that are happening in Groupon, and you know what Groupon is. It's basically a two-sided marketplace, and as a result of that, there is a merchant and a consumer side of things, and we are basically trying to get our technology to become more forward-facing. And obviously it's a new company, but it's still been around over a decade, and so things add up. And so we are trying to make things faster, smarter. We've had a lot of machine learning microservices that we are actually consolidating and upgrading the technology. So there is an announcement that's coming up that's going to talk about our business update, and along with that, how we are making changes to the technology.
Gary, you have been at Purdue for more than 30 years. So I'm sure when you started your teaching career 30 years ago, you weren't even thinking about the things that we are discussing today, or maybe you were, but definitely not the rest of us. So let's talk about how AI is enhancing the student experience, because one thing we know, we need more students coming through the pipeline who are savvy and comfortable with these technologies.
Yeah, well, I'd like to start off by saying it's a good thing this is a 3-hour-long panel because there's a lot going on, okay? Especially at Purdue. We have totally embraced what we call the digital transformation of learning, both online and residential, and that's part of my role there. And we've recognized that we really have to catch up in what's going on, and we're actually using business and industry as a model. So we hear about digital twins. Well, think about you as a learner having a digital twin and being predictive on how you learn, the way you learn, what you like to do, what you don't like to do, and then matching that with the learning outcome. So that's an example of one. Predictive maintenance, okay, is another one. So you're struggling in a course. You may not even know you're struggling in the course because of the way you're going through the materials. That being much more predictive, so it will then allow the instructor or you to get a message basically saying you really need to review this piece, or you need to go to your instructor. And instruction now becomes much more personalized. And that's really what we're looking at. We are looking at totally transforming the learning experience, throwing everything out the window, because we actually know that a lot of what has been done for the last 1,000 years in higher education, which is pretty much the lecture, isn't as effective as something that's called active learning. And there have been hundreds and hundreds of studies that say that active learning is much better than lectures. And that's what we're basing it on. How do we create an active learning experience for every student? Now, some students may want a little bit of lecture, and that's fine, but we will know that beforehand because we have your digital twin.
And by the way, we want to point out that digital twin is not going to do your reading for you. So that student or that child that you're paying that tuition to, they will still have to do their reading. So in the case of clients, the students, of course, are your client that you're trying to improve the experience. Tom and Sachin, I want to ask about how you are using AI to seamlessly improve your customer experience, because we're dealing with a huge customer base. So Tom, you first.
Yeah, sure. The digital twin's a popular one, and I guess one of the things that I'm taking away from this as well, from locomotives to patients to students, we're talking about digital twins. But being able to understand what's happening in a workflow across the network. So if you think about a retailer that maybe has 800 locations, and as one of our customer executives said to us recently, the store is turned into a fulfillment center that it just so happens people also shop in. Right? So it's really turned the model completely upside down, because fulfillment now is happening from those store environments. So you have the stochastics of how do I manage the inventory, the people, the product, the capital assets, and treat those stores as fulfillment centers, as warehouses, but also having in-person shoppers coming in as well. And as many alluded to earlier, the complexity of that, the permutations just aren't possible to do manually. So we're collecting and looking at a lot of that data, what orders are coming in, what orders are predicted to come in, where is inventory located, what's the distance between the orders coming in and those orders to be shipped to, in order to optimize shipping costs. So looking at all of that data and using it to better plan inventory and the labor equation. And what we're really seeing, Janet, is the notion of, as we like to say, planning systems and execution systems are collapsing on top of one another. And what I mean by that is, if you think about planning, you typically have a plan and then you execute the plan, right, for days, the coming days or for a week. And what's happened is those planning cycles have become shorter and shorter, because as we order, for instance, online, or we have the expectation that we can get a medical service in a telehealth type fashion like was discussed earlier, the distance or the time between when you initiate that order or that experience and it actually being delivered is getting closer and closer to zero, right? It's going from days to hours to minutes. And so what is a plan in a world where from the time I order to the time it's delivered is minutes? It's obsolete before it starts. And so collecting that data, understanding what's happening in real time, where are my people, where's my inventory, where's my assets, and then orchestrating all of that in real time is really where we're going. So we think the idea of kind of planning is going away, and it's now the idea of kind of agile unfolding of the workflow in real time. And to do that, you have to have a massive amount of predictability. And the only way to get that predictability, as we heard earlier, is to use these AI and machine learning models to look at what's happening in the near past and then extrapolate that out into the future. So that's an area that we're driving. And it's extraordinarily important for our retail customers because you think about retention and empathy for that frontline worker. Retaining that staff is critical for them, and having a better work experience is what it delivers.
Yeah, trying to achieve predictability in an unpredictable world. And Sachin, for Groupon, when you're dealing with a variety of different retail and services, and that space can be really unpredictable, really fickle, because it's hard to know what the customer wants. Sometimes they don't even know what they want. So as you're managing so many different retailers and you're trying to connect them with the customers across all these retail verticals, how are you using AI?
Yeah, and Janet, as you said earlier, I just recently joined Groupon, and it being a two-sided marketplace is, and the sheer amount of innovation that you can do, I almost feel like kid in a candy store with what I can do with AI and ML. And again, like when you have a marketplace, you got millions of customers on one side and thousands of merchants on the other side. It's a matching problem, right? You're basically trying to find and show the user the best thing that they would be interested in, at the right time with the right incentive. And so on the consumer side, it's about, trying to figure out, and as you said, Janet, sometimes the customer doesn't even know what they want, right? And so you go to a nail salon and you want to get your nails done, and we'll be like, oh, by the way, there is a pizza place right next to your place, which is also offering a Groupon. And so how do you predictably figure out packaging? How do you come up with interesting product offerings for your customers that could be of interest to them? So there are enough things like this we can do. And on the merchant side, again, we have a sales team whose job is to go and close merchants. But again, we can call anybody. So how do you figure out, of all the merchants in the world, which ones to call, right? So again, even before our customers know that they would be interested in something, we have to predictively figure out what would sell. And so we actually have a program that actually qualifies leads that we feed to our sales team. And that sales team actually goes out and then makes those calls. And then we get the feedback from them saying, okay, these worked, these didn't work. And we track their progress through the life cycle of a merchant. So essentially, there is a whole lot of work that we can do on that side. And even through the life cycle of a merchant, how good they are whether our customers are having any issues with them or not, is all the thing that goes back into the feedback loop of our system. So essentially, both on the consumer and the merchant side, we have these feedback loops that feed into our system, and that basically helps us predict, how we can do other things for them.
Which is interesting. I'm glad you shared that, because a lot of us wonder, how do you measure the outcomes of these technologies? Gary, I have a bunch of questions for you. First of all, as we roll out all these technologies, and I had asked Catherine about this, everyone's finding a hard time hiring the people to do this. So first of all, how can we attract more students into that pipeline of things like data analytics, data scientists? And we have a great question from our audience that you've described how you can more accurately predict a great way for a student to learn individually, but how do you measure that engagement and success?
Well, I'll take your first question. We have to start with K through 12. K through 12, I'm too old to be kind, I guess. I'm going to be blunt. It's broke in this country in many cases. There's islands of excellence, and probably your kids are going to them, but there's a lot of K through 12 that really needs to be fixed. Purdue has been active in this. I led an initiative where we created what we call the Purdue Polytechnic Institutes. We put them in the inner cities of Indianapolis, South Bend, and we're expanding them outward. And Polytechnic means that it's really focused on the STEM disciplines, but more importantly, it's all active learning. And so we find the learner's passion. You'd be surprised how students who have struggled in the first 8 years suddenly blossom and flourish, okay? And that's what we have to do, is we have to experiment, be bold, and actually go out and do something and help our K through 12 system do the right thing. The second question on ensuring and measuring engagement, one of the projects I'm leading at Purdue is the classroom of the future. What does the classroom of the future look like? And part of it is there's lots of sensors in there, whether it's cameras or eye tracking movements or whatever. And that's how you can actually measure engagement, is by what is the person actually doing during the session. The other thing is, as I've mentioned quickly with K through 12, is we are trying to create passion projects, open-ended projects that students get really, really excited about. So now they become self-motivated. That is a very engaged learner. And so it's both what we ask them to do and then measuring and looking at what they're doing and then creating interventions so that we ensure that there's the engagement that we want and the learning that's going on. This is so exciting.
Absolutely.
And by the way, the students that do go through these programs, they get a pretty nice paycheck at the end when they graduate. And I see this because every single CEO I have interviewed, they've talked about the need to hire more people, and then they're talking about the money that they are paying these people now. I want to ask you, Tom, what is your workforce size now at Zebra?
We have about 10,000 employees globally.
Okay. Are you using AI to attract more people to come work at Zebra? And if so, how are you doing that?
We are. We've started to accelerate an initiative around that just really over the last year. And I think many have started to look at various types of tools to do that. And you could sort of think of it as intelligence screening is a way that we're looking at that. So using a number of different SaaS packages out there, digitizing kind of our job descriptions, keywords, specifics around those job descriptions, and then using that to, first of all, cast a wider net. I think the days of candidates coming to you and finding you, particularly, and maybe a number of folks in this room are dealing with this, particularly in a situation where, as you mentioned, Janet, we've been around for 50 years, so we're really well known for visibility, mobility, barcode reading, RFID, Android mobile computing, but when you think robotics, or you think AI, or you think ML, those are emerging areas for us. They're maybe sub 10% of our business, but growing really rapidly, and we need to be able to attract that talent. So casting that net becomes really important, doing that more intelligently and using some of those SaaS tools to be able to do that using AI, as well as being able to do the screening. Again, I think many folks, and I mentioned examples earlier, pointed to the challenges with manually doing this at scale just doesn't work. And so being able to apply those filters in an automated fashion is a big help as well.
So again, for those who were not so familiar with Zebra, it is a big, big company, 10,000 employees, doing $7 billion in annual sales. Yep. So monster company. Sachin, again, we are so grateful that you joined us because he is brand new at Groupon, yet a company that started in 2008 still needs to transform, and massively. So I want to ask you, you were brought in to sort of take the next step in your digital revolution. How do you merge seamlessly the platforms, the automation platforms that are there now, and what you're hoping to do? That's a big ask.
Yeah, I mean, and it's a fun one too. So that's why I
until it crashes. I'm only kidding.
So look, I mean, our technology is fairly modern. 10 years is, well, I mean, you can look at both ways. 10 years is a long time in digital world, but relatively speaking, it's fairly modern. And so, and we've been engineering it for a while. And so, like any other place, you incur tech debt. You build stuff and then, it gets older and then you build more things on top of it. So one of the things that I'm looking to do is basically just transform that. We're in the middle of doing a cloud migration. So basically moving everything from on-prem to cloud so that we can use more cloud native technologies and things like that, both on Google and Amazon. So that's one big thing that we'll be able to do. I think generally speaking, like I said, we have done enough work on AI and ML on both the customer side and the merchant side. We're looking to, make it better by improving all of that stuff. Technology has come long ways, 10, 20 years ago, we used to have neural networks, which was basically just teaching a computer how to learn, and by giving them some rules and having them learn over things that you've seen in the past. And now there are things like deep learning, which is beyond that, where you don't even need to learn, the machine learns to learn. And then that's actually a very interesting concept, like self-driving cars and things like that work on those things. So I'm actually thinking, like there are a lot of things that we can build in our company, like, even like the search and relevance, it's run on AI and ML, but again, you can go deeper on that. Even when you type a search, it goes into an n-dimensional space, and you can find the distance between relevant things in that. So, I could just go on and on about the things we can do, but yeah, there is so much work we can do, like lookalike modeling. People who look like this behave that way in the psychographic way. So we can figure those things out, and we can actually start to show more relevant things to people, And that just means that more people can find what they're looking for, more merchants can have better business, and then, we have a thriving marketplace.
I have a quick metaphor about how we have to adopt a technology, then pretty soon you cannot live without it. I was reminded at a past conversation, people used to be terrified of elevators. They thought, I can't trust this. Well, I happened to check into a hotel last night that did not have working elevators. And I said, I really want to trust those elevators. And I really couldn't live without it as I was dragging my bag up 16 floors. Gary, I want to ask you a question. We were talking about enhancing the student experience now. Can you give us a quick comment, because we're down to our last few minutes? What are the roles that we're going to need to fill in the future as every company across every industry has to adopt automation? We know about data scientists. What are the roles we need to fill? What do we need more of?
Well, I think that the new foundations, reading, writing, and arithmetic, when K-12 was invented in higher ed in 1900, around 1900, that's the system we're trying to change. Right now, it's about what we call the digital transformation technologies. That's artificial intelligence, data and data analytics, cloud computing, AR and VR, some of these emerging tools. These are transformational tools. You just need to really look at this very, very carefully. We're at a place in human history unlike any other where machines are smarter than people. So what separates us from the machines? That's what education needs to focus on. It's the creativity, it's the humanity, it's those kinds of things that are going to separate us from the machines as we continue to automate more and more. And that's part of that transformation. So it's not just learning about those transformation technologies, it's also really preparing graduates that are much more creative, open-minded, motivated with the humanity that goes along with it. And that actually is a very bright future rather than a dark one. And that's the way I view the world.
I want one more quick question for each of you, because Sachin and Tom, you're both CTOs of your companies, but the role of a chief technology officer 10 years ago was very different than what you have to deal with now. So 30 seconds each, how do you upscale yourself to learn the latest technologies that you will have to adapt?
Yeah, sure. Well, real quick, I think we're always looking at the gap between the art of possible and what's valuable in the market. And so what's valuable in the market is largely unchanging, but the way you address what's valuable is always changing from a technology perspective. And we're saying, hey, how do we close that gap? And that sort of leads us, Janet, to where are the places we need to learn, and just say, hey, we've got to jump in, as you heard from some of the other panelists, just get started, move forward, take the first steps, get some wins, and then kind of keep moving from there. So it is much more exploratory than certainly it was a decade ago.
And Sachin, you were brought in as a tech expert, but even you probably have to upscale yourself on a daily basis.
Yeah, I think, look, the trick for me and for a company like ours where we are actually dealing with consumers who are unpredictable is experimentation. So essentially, it's all about how do you build and try new things and then basically show it to the customer in an experimental way. So we have mechanisms to do something and make sure that things don't crash, and continue to adapt and iterate from there. So for me, it's experimentation.
Gary, Tom, Sachin, thank you so much for sharing your experiences with our audience.
Thank you.
I told you we needed 3 hours.
Yeah, we did. Follow-up summit, thank you so much. And that brings a close to the formal part of the program. And we thank you so much for joining us for this summit on intelligent automation, creating the workforce of the future. But as you know, we just covered a lot more than that. We hope you enjoyed all the conversations. I am so deeply grateful to all the speakers, the moderators, for this really interesting program. I definitely learned a lot myself. We do want to thank IBM for bringing us all together and making this event possible. If you'd like more information about IBM, please visit the resources tab on the event website. And most of all, thanks to you, the audience, for being so engaged, for being so attentive. I know that we all have a learning curve just being back in person and our attention spans and everything, and you've been terrific. I want to let you know that the fun is just beginning. IBM's partner, Decision Management Solutions, is having an event right after this at Punch Bowl Social, which is right next door. That will happen from 11 a.m. to 1 p.m. Ashton from IBM, I believe, is here. Yes. If you have any more questions about the event and the fun that you will find, I understand it's going to be networking, lunch, and games. That's a very provocative combination. So I say don't miss it. You can ask Ashton. So thanks again. And now it's time for some more networking. Thank you for a great program.